The central banks don't care about any of that. They just want the gold. And so, the theory is if you have much higher interest rates, there is an opportunity cost for holding something that doesn't yield any interest. People don't realize that gold's appreciated by 9.9% per year since 2000. It's outpaced everything, maybe with the exception of Bitcoin. And it's accelerating now because the central banks are accumulating it and they don't care. You see it's the positive real yield and the strong dollar, and gold's still moving up. That's very, very bullish. I think that's these relationships mean nothing to the central banks. And I think that's really the most important thing to keep in mind, is that you have flows of metal at record levels leaving the exchanges. Repatriation, we talked about India, who bought 1.5 times the amount of gold all of last year. They bought it in the first 4 months of this year, and they repatriated 100 metric tons from the Bank of India. They now, in essence, hold all of their gold. From the Bank of England. The Bank of England is by proxy the LBMA. And then just a couple of weeks ago, we talked, probably when I was on your show last, we saw Nigeria, South Africa, Ghana, Senegal, Cameroon, Algeria, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia bring all of their gold back from the COMEX, or from the New York Fed, which is in essence the COMEX. And you're seeing these central banks, they don't care about a positive real yield. And let's just call it what it is. This positive real yield is fugazi. I mean, yeah, so that's if we believe inflation's 3.5% and you're getting 5% in a short-term treasury. But we know that the inflation numbers are a lie. We know that inflation is much higher than that. But even still, if we take it at face value, when you have a positive real return in short-term treasuries, it should be the death knell for gold, and a very strong dollar where it should be the inverse of gold. And I think that's incredibly bullish. And it just shows how much these central banks want to accumulate gold. They're the ones, I think, that are keeping the price elevated as they continue to accumulate it, because the unit, as we know, is 40% gold, which is the only other tier one asset in the world. So the central banks know the playbook. And that's what I would take away from it, is that, if this positive yield on the 10-year treasury or on the short-term treasuries was so enticing, then why are all of these countries selling treasuries and buying gold? And I think that's really what I would take away, is that in the end, they just want the gold and they don't care about any of these other relationships.
Did you know that countries like China are offloading $53 billion in US treasuries, while nations like India, Saudi Arabia, and South Africa are repatriating massive amounts of gold? Andy Schectman reveals that central banks are hoarding gold at unprecedented levels, signaling a seismic shift in global finance. In the first 4 months of this year alone, India bought 1.5 times the gold they purchased all of last year. Just recently, countries like Nigeria, South Africa, Ghana, Algeria, and more have brought their gold back from foreign reserves. Why are these nations abandoning the US dollar and stockpiling gold? This could be the catalyst for an economic collapse that reshapes the world order. Are we on the brink of a financial meltdown orchestrated by global central banks? The US has created $1 trillion in debt every 100 days, and the consequences could be dire.
Massive debt. But I mean, to me, the debt is kind of the sideshow. Yeah, the debt, it would be a reason for people. At some point, the debt has to matter, right? And interest rates that have been suppressed forever, that have created distortions in asset prices, all these things have to matter. We once had a very thriving economy. I think it's been brought to its knees by things like political corruption, manipulation of the news, inflation, the printing of money that gives the illusion of a thriving economy when you see just a handful of stocks pushing the whole indice up. And you realize that the Russell 2000, as an example, which is a much broader indication of the economy, most of it's underwater. If you spent $100 every second of every day, it would take you almost 2,000 years to equal just the 6.2 trillion we've spent in the last 12 months. This is the kind of, excess spending, and you mix into it the meddling in affairs of other nations that I think accelerate the decline of the dollar. You're seeing countries like China unload $53 billion in treasuries a month ago. You're seeing what's happening all around this country, politically, socially, morally, all of these things, they all have significance. But to me, none of it all pales in comparison to the betrayal of trust. As Putin described where we are right now at this meeting recently that he had in Novograd, he came out and said that the Bretton Woods system is dead and that the dollar is backed by nothing other than trust. And when you talk about trust, a country that has really betrayed it by weaponizing the dollar, stealing it in essence, taking the reserves of the Russian government and using the proceeds to buy weapons to give to the country Russia's fighting a war against. That's a line you can never come back from. And the world looks at us as being very hypocritical. We've talked about that forever, where we can give $260 billion to the Ukraine with no congressional oversight. But if anyone else gives any money to Russia to fight the Ukraine, well, they get sanctioned and threatened. And we're a country that has no fiscal responsibility or monetary responsibility. Where 1 trillion seconds ago was 31,688 years ago, and we're creating $1 trillion in debt every 100 days. We are impoverishing our children and our grandchildren. There will be a consequence for all of this. But I guess to me, it is the hypocrisy and the weaponization that is far greater than the mismanagement of the reserve currency. And what really makes it, I think, worse, which accelerates the de-dollarization and the de-treasurization, is the moral fabric decaying in this country. Because the United States used to stand for so much, and it seems that it doesn't at this moment. And at least that's the image that we are portraying to the world. So I think if you're not a contrarian right now, Danny, you're damn well bound to be a victim. And I don't look at gold as an investment. To me, it's wealth. And not only is it the only other tier one asset in the world as reclassified by the most influential bank on the planet, the central bank, the BIS, but it's being accumulated by the central banks at levels the world has never seen. And in terms of international reserves, it's up to almost 18%, which is the most in almost 30 years. And it's the second largest asset now held in central bank reserves, surpassing the euro for the first time ever. So it's slowly gaining traction, but only with the central banks, right? So the people in the West are asleep as the central banks are literally accumulating everything that's not nailed down using the Western paper price, the suppression of it, the massive leverage of the Western markets to drain the exchanges, delivery cycle after delivery cycle when no one's paying attention. And you see, everyone's invested in NVIDIA and Apple and Bitcoin. At the same time, they're missing out on what is a shift of, I think, a shift of what is considered money. I think gold, it has been remonetized in most of the world. It is now replacing the Treasury because it can't be confiscated, because it can't be defaulted. Just all of those answers that you gave, in essence, what the question should have really said is, do you feel that gold, in essence, replaces the Treasury market? The Treasury market, if you look at the 10-year Treasury, gold has doubled its performance for the last 25 years, doubled. And it has no counterparty liability. It has that historical significance. It can't be inflated away or defaulted upon. It is now the second largest asset in central bank holdings. It is the only other tier one asset in the world. And I think when you realize and look at it that way, a country that should be clinging and nurturing its world reserve status as a privilege, we've done everything we can to shed it and lose it. So it's not even as much gold as it is the dollar. And unless you think the dollar will spike in value for some reason, then holding gold right now has never been more important and probably carrying the least amount of downside risk, even though we're at or near all-time highs, because I think the dollar, in essence, is getting close to, the ninth inning, or maybe the end of the ninth inning in terms of its run. And gold is just being, I think, these central banks are recognizing gold once again for what it truly is and what it has always been, and that is, wealth. So I don't think that people really need to worry about gold falling to the downside unless you think there's a miraculous rebound in global strength and trust in the dollar and in the U.S. Treasury market.